Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. Continuing our discussion of baptism, I've heard another argument against the necessity of baptism for salvation. This is a very, very common argument, and that is, what about the guy in Africa, who has no water around anywhere? How is he supposed to be saved? If baptism really is necessary for salvation, well, then that guy's going to be lost. Okay? A similar argument might be, well, what if somebody decides they want to be baptized and they're on their way to be baptized? Maybe they're going to be baptized at the church building or wherever it is they're going to be baptized, and on the way, a tree falls on their car, or they get in a wreck and they die, and they haven't been baptized. Well, does that mean that they aren't saved? Now, this argument is used many, many times. I've heard this dozens of times to disprove that baptism is necessary for salvation. That argument is so problematic on so many levels. It's not even logical. It doesn't even work, okay? Because it does a couple of things. First of all, it assumes that God would be fine in that situation, okay? It assumes that, yes, the guy who got in a wreck on the way would still go to heaven, he'd still be saved, and the guy in Africa with no water, he would still go to heaven, okay? That's what that assumes. Now, in fairness, okay, I have the same assumption, all right? I think absolutely God is going to be merciful in that situation. He knows, okay, what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. But what I want you to see is it doesn't really matter what I think, and it doesn't really matter what you think. That's just an opinion, and we're just assuming that, well, since there's no water around for this guy in Africa, well, he'll still be saved. Okay, well, that sounds good on the surface, but how do we know? I mean, God is the ultimate judge. We can't make that call, okay? But that's not really the main problem with the argument. That's fine. I mean, let's even, for the sake of argument, grant that, yes, they're going to go to heaven anyway. Let's just grant that, okay? Because, again, I believe that myself. I think, yeah, they will go to heaven. They will still be saved, even if they tried to get baptized, but they couldn't for some reason. Here's the main problem with this argument. What we're doing is we're creating a rule out of an exception, which makes absolutely no sense. For instance, what if there was a mentally handicapped person who is, he comes to church because his family goes to church, but he's not really able to have faith because, he just doesn't really have the mental capacity to have faith. He doesn't really understand, this person may be 30 years old, but their brain may still function as a 5-year-old or even a 2-year-old, and they don't really have any concept of Jesus Christ and the cross and all that. Let's just say that's the case. Well, what if I said, well, since that person can't have faith, that means none of us have to have faith. That means faith must not be necessary, because this person who's mentally handicapped, he's still going to go to heaven. Even though he can't have faith, he's still going to go to heaven, so that means that we don't have to have faith if we want to go to heaven. How about that argument? Does that make any sense? Or what if we say, well, there's an elderly lady, and she's deathly ill, and she is just sick on her deathbed, and she's not able to come to church. And so since she can't come to church and engage in Bible study and all that, well, that means we don't have to either. Because, listen, it's, she's still going to go to heaven. Doesn't have to go to church because she's sick, and there's no way she can go to church. So going to church must not be necessary. And, as a Christian, I guess Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 doesn't really mean anything. It tells us not to forsake the assembly, not to forsake meeting with our brethren when they decide to meet, but it must not be necessary. Do you see how absurd that is? You're taking somebody who is physically unable to do something and saying, well, since they're physically unable to, God's going to forgive them, and so we can do the same thing. That makes no sense. God has given us the ability. That's poor wording. I'm not going to say I don't care about the guy in Africa, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is, the guy in Africa has nothing to do with me, okay, and my salvation. Because you know what? Maybe he doesn't have water over there, but I've got plenty of water here, and I know that God says I need to be baptized. And so I'm not going to make up all these exceptions and say, well, I don't need to be baptized, because that makes no sense at all. Since we have the ability to respond, that means we have responsibility to go and do what God has asked us to do. I hope that's clear. Thank you for your interest in spiritual things, and Lord willing, I'll see you next time.